Everyone thinks this was just another coaching hire, another press release, another reset in Cleveland. But that assumption misses the real story entirely. Because what just happened behind the scenes in Cleveland wasn't routine, it was calculated, quiet, and franchise shifting. Sources around the league are saying this decision had almost nothing to do with resumes, interviews, or public optics. This wasn't about checking boxes or playing it safe. It was about control, direction, and most importantly, the quarterback position. For years, the Browns have danced around commitment. New coaches, new systems, new plans, all without ever fully tying their future to one clear vision. That hesitation cost them seasons. It cost them stability. And it turned the quarterback position into a revolving door that never stopped spinning. But this time feels different, and not because of what was announced publicly. What's raising eyebrows inside NFL circles is what Todd Monken allegedly walked into those meetings with. Not coach speak, not vague ideas, a detailed blueprint, a long-term plan, and according to multiple reports, that plan revolved around one name the Browns weren't supposed to be ready to commit to yet. That's where this story takes a turn. Because this hire wasn't just about finding a head coach who could manage a locker room or call plays on Sundays. It was about aligning the entire organization around a quarterback vision they've quietly been circling for years, one that traces back to draft conversations, private evaluations, and a moment most fans never heard about. And if what insiders are saying is even half true, Cleveland didn't just hire a coach. They chose a direction. They chose a timeline, and they may have already chosen their quarterback. But the way this plan started, and the moment that convinced Todd Monken he was right, is the part no one is talking about yet. At first glance, it looked like a familiar Cleveland move, another coaching search, another press conference, another attempt to reset the clock. But inside league circles, this hire raised eyebrows immediately because this wasn't a reactionary decision, and it definitely wasn't business as usual. The Cleveland Browns didn't just select the best resume in the room. Reports suggest they chose a vision, and that distinction matters more than most fans realize. In most coaching searches, teams start with the coach and figure out the quarterback later. That's how chaos starts. New systems collide with mismatched talent, patience runs thin, and the cycle repeats. Cleveland has lived that reality for decades. Different voices, different schemes, no long-term alignment, just survival mode at the most important position in sports. This time, insiders say the process flipped. According to people familiar with the search, Todd Monken didn't walk into those interviews selling himself. He walked in selling a direction, not vague optimism, not coach speak about competition. A clear, aggressive philosophy built around quarterback development and offensive identity. That clarity reportedly separated him from every other candidate. And that's why this hire landed differently. The Browns weren't just asking, "Can you coach this roster?" They were asking, "Can you define our future?" That's a subtle but massive shift, because for once, Cleveland wasn't hedging. They weren't planning for multiple timelines or keeping options open. League chatter suggests they wanted a coach who already knew exactly what kind of quarterback he needed, how he wanted to build around him, and how long the process would realistically take. That level of conviction is rare, especially for a franchise that's been burned so many times before. What makes this even more unusual is how quiet it was. No leaks during the process, no public hints, no media-driven momentum. While fans debated familiar names, Cleveland was reportedly focused on alignment behind closed doors. Coach, system, quarterback, all pointing in the same direction. And when a team finally commits like that, it changes everything. The draft strategy shifts, free agency priorities sharpen, development plans become intentional instead of reactive. But here, the key detail most people missed: this vision didn't start during the interview cycle. It didn't suddenly appear after the hire. According to reports, it traces back years to draft conversations, evaluations, and a quarterback Monken never forgot. And that's where this story really begins. While most of the public conversation stayed focused on coaching resumes and scheme fits, people close to the process say the real obsession inside the building centered on one thing: the quarterback. And not in a vague, "we'll figure it out later" way. Reports suggest Todd Monken walked into those interviews already locked in on what the next phase of the Cleveland Browns needed to look like under center. According to league chatter, Monken didn't treat the quarterback position as a flexible variable. He treated it as the starting point. Everything else, roster construction, offensive philosophy, even timeline expectations, was built outward from that core idea. And the name tied to that vision is one Browns fans weren't expecting to hear so soon: Shedeur Sanders. To be clear, this isn't being presented as official confirmation, but multiple reports claim Monken spoke about Shedeur with a level of specificity that separated him from other candidates. Not general praise, not buzzwords, detailed traits, processing speed, pocket composure, accuracy under pressure, the kind of language that suggests long-term evaluation, not casual interest. What's striking is how quietly this all happened. There were no leaks during the hearing process, no national headlines connecting Monken to Shedeur at the time. That silence is part of why this angle flew under the radar. But insiders say the Browns weren't just listening, they were measuring how serious Monken was about building around a quarterback instead of cycling through one. And this is where the story deepens. It's been said that Monken's belief in Shedeur wasn't formed overnight. Reports suggest he had been tracking his development for years, studying how he handled pressure, expectations, and constant scrutiny. That matters in Cleveland, where the margin for error at quarterback feels microscopic. There's also the influence factor. Growing up under the guidance of Deion Sanders shaped how Shedeur approaches preparation and accountability. Insiders claim Monken viewed that background as an advantage, not a distraction, a sign that the moment wouldn't overwhelm him. What made this obsession different wasn't hype, it was conviction. Monken reportedly didn't pitch Shedeur as a gamble or a project. He framed him as a solution that required alignment and patience, two things Cleveland hasn't always offered at the position. And once that perspective landed, it changed the tone of everything. Because if the quarterback truly is the foundation, then this hire starts to look less like a coaching move and more like the first domino in a much bigger plan. There's a moment from the draft process that keeps coming up in league circles, and it's one most fans never heard about. Not because it was dramatic, not because it leaked, but because it stayed quiet and apparently stuck with the coach involved. According to reports, during the pre-draft cycle, Todd Monken didn't just watch tape from afar. He reached out, directly. Conversations were had with Deion Sanders and eventually with Shedeur Sanders himself. This wasn't casual scouting chatter, it was intentional, forward-looking dialogue. What's been said is that Monken floated an initial role that surprised some people: a developmental entry point, a backup situation. A chance to learn the system, adjust to the league, and grow behind an established starter. On paper, it sounded reasonable. Plenty of young quarterbacks take that path. But Shedeur's response is the part insiders still talk about. There was no blowback, no ego-driven pushback, no disrespect. Reports claim Shedeur simply declined, calmly, confidently, not because he felt above the opportunity, but because he understood who he was and how he saw his career unfolding. He wasn't built to arrive quietly and wait for permission. He believed he was ready to compete, not observe. That distinction mattered. People close to the situation say Monken didn't view that response as stubbornness. He saw clarity, self-awareness, a quarterback who knew his preparation level and trusted it. In a league where uncertainty at the position ruins careers, that kind of conviction can stand out. What made the moment even more impactful was the context. Shedeur had lived under pressure his entire football life. Expectations followed him everywhere. Every throw was dissected, every decision magnified. Monken reportedly saw that environment as a proving ground, not a burden, a signal that the spotlight wouldn't shake him. That draft interaction didn't lead to an immediate pairing, but it didn't disappear either. Insiders say it lingered. It informed how Monken evaluated Shedeur moving forward. It added a layer that film alone couldn't provide. So when Monken later walked into head coaching interviews and talked about quarterbacks with uncommon specificity, that earlier moment mattered. It wasn't theoretical anymore. It was personal experience layered on top of years of evaluation. That's why this hire feels less like coincidence and more like continuation. Because sometimes the biggest decisions aren't made in press conferences or draft rooms. They're shaped by quiet moments and answers that reveal exactly who someone believes they are. Belief is one thing, proof is another. And this is where the conversation around Todd Monken stops being theoretical and starts getting uncomfortable for anyone trying to dismiss this hire as hype. Monken doesn't sell hope, he sells results. Look at his most recent NFL work with the Baltimore Ravens, where he was handed a quarterback many still didn't fully trust as a passer, Lamar Jackson. When Monken arrived, the question wasn't whether Lamar was dynamic, everyone knew that. The real question was whether his passing game could reach an elite, sustainable level inside a modern NFL offense. What happened next is the receipt. Under Monken's system, Lamar didn't just improve, he transformed. The offense evolved from predictable to layered, from reactive to aggressive. Defenses couldn't sit on tendencies anymore. They were forced to defend the entire field every down. That shift wasn't accidental, it was intentional design. Monken built concepts around Lamar's strengths instead of fighting them. He leaned into play action, spacing, and progression reads that simplified post-snap decisions without dumbing anything down. The result was efficiency paired with explosiveness, the hardest combination to achieve in this league. The numbers back it up. An MVP-level season, another year with 40-plus touchdown production and minimal mistakes. That kind of ratio isn't normal in today's NFL. That's the mark of an offense that understands its quarterback and puts him in control instead of survival mode. And here's the part that matters most for Cleveland. Monken didn't need Lamar to become someone else to unlock that production. He refined what was already there. He sharpened strengths. He reduced unnecessary risk. He let the quarterback play fast without playing reckless. That philosophy travels. People inside league circles point to this as the reason Monken's pitch resonated so strongly. It wasn't built on fantasy comps or best-case scenarios. It was built on pattern recognition. Identify the quarterback's core traits, design around them, expand responsibly. That's why this hire carries weight beyond a typical coaching cycle. Because when a coach has already proven he can elevate a quarterback's ceiling, not just manage it, the conversation changes. Development stops being a gamble and starts looking like a process. And if Monken could guide that level of growth with a quarterback who entered the league labeled as raw in certain areas, it forces an uncomfortable question for the rest of the league. What happens when he's paired with a quarterback who already thrives as a passer? That's where this story starts to shift from possibility to something much more real. When people talk about scheme fit, it usually turns into lazy comparisons. Same body type, same highlights, same surface-level traits, but that's not what's happening here. The reason Shedeur Sanders fits what Todd Monken wants to build has nothing to do with aesthetics, it's about how he plays the position. Start with processing. One of the quiet strengths in Shedeur's game is how quickly he identifies leverage before the snap and confirms it after. He's comfortable working through progressions instead of locking onto one option and hoping it wins. That matters in Monken's offense, which relies on layered concepts and timing rather than freelance hero ball. The quarterback has to see the field clearly, not just throw hard. Then there's accuracy. Shedeur isn't just a deep ball thrower or a highlight merchant. His real value shows up in the intermediate areas, the throws that move chains, punish soft coverage, and keep an offense on schedule. Monken's best offenses thrive there. They stress defenses horizontally and vertically at the same time, forcing safeties to hesitate. That hesitation is where precise quarterbacks eat. Mobility is another piece people misunderstand. Shedeur isn't a run-first quarterback, and that's actually the point. He moves well enough to extend plays, reset platforms, and punish defenses that lose discipline without abandoning structure. That balance is critical. Monken doesn't need chaos, he needs control with options. Shedeur gives him that. There's also the mental side. Growing up under Dylan Sanders meant pressure was never optional. Every game was scrutinized, every mistake amplified. That environment tends to break players or sharpen them. Insiders say Monken viewed Shedeur as the latter, someone who already understands accountability, preparation, and expectations before ever stepping into an NFL building. What makes this pairing intriguing isn't that Shedeur needs to be rebuilt, it's that he does. Monken's strength has always been refinement, not reinvention. Identify what a quarterback already does well, remove inefficiencies. Expand the menu without overwhelming the player. That's how you get growth without regression. This is why people around the league say the fit feels intentional. Shedeur's game doesn't fight Monken's philosophy, it feeds it. Timing, accuracy, poise, enough movement to stay dangerous, enough discipline to stay on script. And when that alignment exists, development stops feeling like a gamble. It starts looking like a timeline. For the Cleveland Browns, that distinction might be the most important part of this entire hire. Not everyone inside the building reportedly saw this hire the same way, and that's where things get complicated. When the Cleveland Browns finalized their decision, league chatter suggested there was a noticeable split in enthusiasm, not publicly but internally. Some voices inside the locker room had been pushing for continuity, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and according to reports, that preference wasn't subtle. Veteran leaders like Mullins, Gerpt, and Dunzel Ward had been openly supportive of keeping Jim Schwartz in a larger role. From their perspective, it made sense. The defense had an identity, a tone, a system that worked. Changing leadership meant risking that stability. So when the organization pivoted toward an offense-first head coach, it reportedly raised eyebrows. Now, to be clear, there's no indication of open conflict or public backlash. But insiders say the shift created tension, not personal but philosophical. Defense-driven leadership versus quarterback-driven vision. Immediate continuity versus long-term restructuring. That kind of crossroads tends to expose underlying priorities. What makes this situation more delicate is timing. The Browns aren't rebuilding from scratch. They have star talent, expectations, a locker room that believes it can win now. When a new head coach arrives with a strong offensive mandate, it forces everyone else to adjust, even players who've been carrying the team. That adjustment isn't always smooth. Reports suggest this was part of the broader calculation. Cleveland wasn't just choosing a coach, they were choosing which side of the ball would define the franchise moving forward, and that choice can feel uncomfortable for leaders who've already proven their value. At the same time, offensive players and quarterback-focused voices were said to be quietly optimistic. From their angle, this hire finally brought clarity. No more half measures, no more rotating philosophies, just one clear direction. That's the risk and reward element here. When an organization commits fully, it gains alignment, but it also exposes friction. Monken's reputation suggests he won't avoid that tension. He's known for directness, accountability, clear expectations. That approach can unify a locker room quickly or test it early. How that balance plays out matters more than any press conference quote. Because if the Browns can blend their defensive core's intensity with an offense finally built around a quarterback vision, the payoff could be massive. But if alignment cracks, if sides feel sidelined, it becomes a stress test few coaches survive. That's why this hire isn't just about play calling or quarterback development. It's about leadership under pressure, and whether Cleveland's locker room can rally around a future that looks different than the one some expected. What happens next won't show up immediately on Sundays, but it will shape everything that follows. Cleveland fans have heard promises before. New eras, fresh starts. This time it's different, and almost every time it ended the same way, with another quarterback reset and another year of questions. That history is exactly why this moment feels heavier than a typical coaching change. The Cleveland Browns haven't just struggled to find a quarterback, they've struggled to commit to one. Over the years, they've cycled through first-round picks, veteran stopgaps, late-round flyers, and emergency plans. Every approach imaginable was tried, often without patience or alignment. When things got uncomfortable, the plan changed again. That's what makes this situation stand out. This time, the organization appears to have chosen direction before desperation forced their hand. Hearing Todd Monken wasn't about plugging a hole for the upcoming season. It was about finally connecting philosophy with personnel. Reports suggest the Browns didn't want a coach who would figure out the quarterback later. They wanted someone who already understood how the quarterback fit into the future. That's where Shedeur enters the conversation in a different light. Not as a savior, not as a guarantee, but as a player who aligns with a clear vision. For the first time in a long time, Cleveland's plan doesn't feel reactionary, it feels intentional. The difference isn't hype, it's structure. A coach who prioritizes quarterback development. A system designed around strengths instead of forcing reinvention. An organization seemingly willing to stay the course instead of panicking at the first sign of adversity. That combination has been missing here for decades. There's also the emotional side. Browns fans know pain. They've invested belief into too many short-term fixes that collapsed under pressure. That history creates skepticism, but it also creates perspective. When fans sense alignment, real alignment, it stands out immediately. This moment isn't being sold as a guarantee of success. Nothing in the NFL ever is. but it does represent something Cleveland hasn't had in a long time: clarity, a coach, a quarterback vision, and an organization finally pulling in the same direction. If it works, it changes everything. Stability replaces chaos, development replaces survival, confidence replaces constant doubt, and even if the outcome isn't instant, the process finally makes sense. That's why this feels different, not because of bold headlines or offseason buzz, but because for once, Cleveland appears to be building forward instead of starting over. And for a franchise that's been stuck in reset mode for generations, that alone might be the biggest change of all. So now the Browns are standing at a crossroads they've visited dozens of times before, but this time, the road feels unfamiliar. On one side is the history, decades of resets. Quarterbacks brought in with promises only to be replaced before stability ever had a chance to form. Systems changing faster than players could adapt. Hope rising in the offseason and crashing by mudya. Cleveland fans know that cycle by heart, and they've learned to protect themselves from believing too early. But on the other side is something new. For the first time in a long time, the organization didn't stumble into a quarterback conversation after hearing a coach. According to reports, the quarterback vision came first, and the coach was chosen because he aligned with it. That alone separates this moment from so many that came before it. Todd Monken isn't being asked to improvise. He isn't inheriting chaos and hopping to make it work. He's walking in with authority, clarity, and a reputation built on developing quarterbacks the right way. That matters more than splashy press conferences or bold quotes ever could. And then there's Shedeur Sanders, not as a promise, not as a savior, but as a question the franchise is finally willing to ask honestly. Can a quarterback be developed when the coach believes in him before the first snap? Can patience exist in a city that's been burned so many times before? Can alignment finally replace desperation? None of this guarantees success. The NFL doesn't work that way. Development is fragile, circumstances change fast, and every plan gets tested once the games start counting. But this situation isn't built on panic or pressure, it's built on intent. That's why this moment matters. If this works, it doesn't just solve a position, it reshapes the identity of the Cleveland Browns. It turns a franchise known for instability into one defined by patience and process. It changes how free agents view Cleveland, how young players develop, how the locker room responds when adversity hits. And if it doesn't work, at least the failure will come from commitment instead of confusion, from choosing a direction and standing in it instead of hedging and restarting. That's the real open question here. Not whether Shedeur becomes a star, not whether Monken wins immediately, but whether Cleveland can finally break its most damaging habit, giving up too soon. Because for the first time in years, this feels like more than hope. It feels like a plan, and plans, when followed through, have a way of changing everything. Now the only thing left is time, and whether the Browns are finally ready to let something grow instead of tearing it down.